Hello, welcome to episode 2 of the Tapped Out MTG podcast. And it's also part 2 of our journey to find the best one drop in Commander. If you don't know what's going on, if you missed the first episode, there's going to be a link to it right up here. I can't reach over to that part, but it's going to be in the upper right part of the screen. Please go watch the first episode. Then you'll figure out how we got here. But since this is a new episode, guests, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourselves? My name is Mason. I am going to be your host for today, and I'm the owner of Tapped Out and MTG. Why don't you guys go ahead and introduce yourselves?
My name is Marco. I love some Commander. I love talking to my microphone like an egotistical douchebag, and I'm very excited to talk about one-drops.
I'm Hannah, and my favorite card is Massacre Girl. Don't think about it too differently other than just she's cool and nothing else.
I'm Evan. Streets of New Capenna was the best set in existence. Don't argue with me.
Okay. All right. Why don't we go ahead and just hop right back into it? Round 2, or the quarterfinals, if you want to call it that. We have the one and only Birds of Paradise. I'm not going to go too in-depth into the explanation of what the cards do. That was all covered in episode 1. Go watch that.
A lot.
You should go watch that. Birds of Paradise, tap for any color. 0/1. Also the face of all mana dorks that are 1-drop. Guys, what do you think? Facing against Stitcher Supplier. Black 1-drop enters or leaves the battlefield. Mill 3 cards.
Honestly, the power level of these cards in my head is pretty comparable. So what it comes down to me is ubiquity. You play Stitcher Supplier in like 90% of your black decks. You play Birds of Paradise and usually a few of its friends in 100% of your green decks. I think that's enough to make them better. Stitcher Supplier maybe has an arguably higher ceiling. Milling 6 is a lot, but the extra mana is relevant for the entire game. The flying body or even just the smaller ground body is relevant all game. The mana dorks are a quintessential part of this format. Stitcher Supplier is important, but the mana dorks still win it out.
I think the only thing in my mind, other than what Mark has said here, is something worth considering is how Stitcher Supplier is, when it enters or dies, you usually, unless you're playing a sacrifice deck or you have a very aggressive opponent that's constantly swinging at you, don't always have a guaranteed way of having it die. So while you can play it and be very satisfied with its it enters and mills 3 on its entry, and perfectly have a great game. And while you're usually going to find a way later in the game to kill it, whether that's through playing a sacrifice outlet or blocking and having the benefits, you can always use a mana dork. You know, like the second you play it, that next turn cycle when it doesn't have that summoning sickness, you can use a mana dork no matter what. You're not going to get the second mill effect unless you have a way of killing it, which you don't always have guaranteed.
I think with I think with Birds of Paradise, something that's worth noting is it taps for mana of any color at the rate of 1 mana. Most of the time, you're having to pay 2 mana for your Arcane Signet, 3 mana for your Commander Sphere. This is much higher rates, or even something like your Beast Caller Savant. That's at 2 mana, just to give you a rainbowed mana dork. Birds of Paradise does this at 1 mana, which is the best rate in the entire game. If we start bumping up the CMC for mill effects, we start to see some effects that can mill you 10 plus cards for something like 2-3 mana, which can beat out Saracen, or maybe it mills you every turn for 3. After 2 turns, that's already what Stitcher Supplier is going to do.
I feel like Stitcher Supplier is made slightly worse by the existence of Hermit Druid, which is both an insanely good mill outlet on its own while also being a combo piece for a win.
Yeah. Stitcher Supplier is, like I said, it is one of my favorite cards. I run it in my artifact mill deck, my Anrak here, the Traveler deck, even though it's not an artifact. Like, it's that good. Like, the feeling of getting that down turn 1 milling is so good. I think they're so close, but it pains me as much as I love Stitcher Supplier, and I would love to see any arguments that people have in the comments section below about Stitcher Supplier, but I would probably have to hand it to Birds of Paradise for this round. Anyone oppose?
Argument there. Nah.
It feels sad. One last thing I will say about Stitcher Supplier is that it is really unique in what it does. There are a lot of things that do what Birds of Paradise does, and you can replace them. Or you could replace birds, and it would feel fine if you would just throw in like an Abyssin build run and a Selesnya deck. But I think Stitcher Supplier is unreplaceable in a lot of the decks I want on it.
The most comparable thing that I found in the 1-drop slot is Patchwork Beastie from Duskmourn, which lets you mill 1 in your upkeep on a 3/3 body, which is notable. It feels like a very good... I have a Jund mill deck that loves playing that card on turn 1. It never feels as good as playing Stitcher Supplier does.
All right. And, okay, next round of the quarterfinals. This is one I'm excited about. When I saw this in the bracket, I was wondering if these 4 were going to meet. But here we are with the 2, I'm just going to say it, 2 best life gain, just probably 2 of the best life gain cards ever. Is that unfair to say? Does anyone?
I don't think that.
I don't think that's unfair.
Here we have Soul Warden / Essence Warden, but I'm going to call it Soul Warden. 1 white, when a creature enters the battlefield, gain a life. Versus Serra Ascendant. It is, for all intents and purposes, a 6/6 flying lifelink when you start the game. So this is incremental light gain versus large burst light gain at the start. And then if you're in the late game, you might have a smaller Serra's Ascendant, but it is still a light version body. I'll go ahead and start this one. But I'm not actually entirely sure. I'm going to say I'm pretty 50-50 on either of these. Soul Warden, Essence Warden is maybe the best card in your life gain deck to get out. It'll always gain you life. But Serra's Ascendant dropping at turn 1 is so powerful. I mean, it might just win you the game at the start. I mean, if not win you the game, then put you in a position to win the game. And then there's also the argument that later in the game, Serra's Ascendant might not have the boost if you've already lost life. But then again, if you're playing it in a life link deck, your life is going to be higher than 40. That's just how life decks go. And if your life is below 40 late game, you're already doing something wrong, and you have bigger problems to fix in your board state. So I think I'm going to have to hand it to Essence Warden, Soul Warden. I don't know. You know what? I can't decide yet. I'm going to have to let you guys convince me either way.
All right, let me jump in first because I just thought of this. So I think in a format like Commander where you have 4 players, a really big thing to consider when you're talking about how powerful cards are, not all the time, and it shouldn't be the priority, is kind of the politics of the game. I think it's more likely when you're playing a 1-mana 6/6 on turn 1 for you to become the target of the game by all of your opponents rather than a Soul Warden or S Warden. And that's really worth thinking about. But it makes it a really tricky call of like, is that what makes this card better than the other? Because I don't know if that's what makes it better. But I would personally be considering this if I had a 1-drop slot available in my Commander deck and both of these could go in. I'd be thinking, do I want a bigger creature that gains me more life on its own by attacking, or do I want something that cares more about what my opponents are doing, which is also not guaranteed? Like, if I'm going up against an artifact deck and they're just slamming down these cheap artifacts or making treasure tokens, I'm not getting Soul Warden triggers or Essence Warden triggers. But I'm able to gain life with Seraph and Swinging Steel. So, I don't know.
I think I just started to ask a generic question to the panel.
Yeah.
And I'll take a yes or no answer from all of you. Serra's Ascendant. If you just have a spot open in your generic white commander deck and you're not doing life gain at all, would you play Serra's Ascendant?
Absolutely.
Yes.
Absolutely. Yes.
Fun building for power, Serra's Ascendant is going.
Okay.
So, here's my math of Soul Warden and Serra's Ascendant. You are right that it has diminishing returns in the late game. So do Soul Warden. Once you play that card sometime past turn 6 when board states are already established, it will not be gaining you anywhere near as much life. These are both dead draws in the late game. So we need to compare their early games. Soul Warden and Essence Warden are the single best things that you can be doing in a deck that wants to be gaining incremental amounts of life. If you care specifically about the when you gain life effects and not how much life you gained, then gaining off of any creature entering, not just your own, is the best way of possibly going about it. That thing, Thera Ascendant gives you significantly more life per turn and is much better for any commander or card that cares about the amount of life that you gained. You will always be able to connect with Thera Ascendant if it survives a turn cycle. Here's what pushes Thera Ascendant over the edge for me. There is no other 1-drop in the game that presents a must-answer threat because of itself. There are all other must-answer 1-drop. Esper Sentinel is a must-answer 1-drop because it's going to draw you into fuel to win the game. The Soul Wardens are must-answer 1-drops because you need to keep them down before they get the Mother of Runes effects are must-answer 1-drop because otherwise you won't be able to answer their commander. Thera Ascendant is the only 1-drop that needs to be answered because itself is too powerful for you to fight through. There's no other 1-drop that you need to burn a removal spell on because if you do not, it by itself will run away with the game. If Thera Ascendant is around for 2 turns past the turn you played it, it has caused a 24-point life swing at that point, which is almost impossible to come back from by turn 3. And then it just gets better as the game goes on. It fuels itself. If you can kill it and they can recur it, you're already going to be at that higher life total because it put you there. This card was very blatantly not designed for this format and should not be a part of it and doesn't gel well with what it does. The Soul of Essence Warden are fantastic cards that deserve to see play in every life gain deck. Thera Ascendant deserves to play in every white deck as long as it's allowed to be a part of this, and it shouldn't be.
Yeah, okay. Mark, you got me. Thera's Ascendant is too good. I think one of the reasons, and I realized this halfway through your speech, the reason why I'm so high on Essence Wood in particular is because I play it in my Dina Soul Steeper deck, and that deck cares so much more about getting every single one instance of you gaining life to drain a life with Dina. So, yeah, no, Thera's Ascendant is better. You're right.
I'd like to take a second to mention how the Soul Warden and Essence Warden have a higher ceiling. I know Marco mentioned that all these cards get worse in the late game. I would argue that the Soul and Essence Warden gets better in the late game. That's when the token decks are going to be making 10, 15, upwards of 20 or 30 tokens in a turn cycle. And at that point, these cards just look straight silly. However, their floor is also much lower. If people are curving out, that means you are getting 4 life a turn cycle, which is just not great. Even for 1 mana, 4 life is... We don't play healing stuff, and that's 3.
Evan, you're winning me back. You're winning me back.
With Soul and Essence Warden is requiring your opponents to actively contribute to your game plan. If you are the token deck and you are playing Soul Warden, that's amazing. That's 20, 30 life in that turn that's in the late game. But what are you using that life on? Mark mentioned that you need a second card to use something that life. You need like your Will Scion of Peace to take advantage of that. Thera Ascendant just does everything it needs by itself without anything else. And I personally am going to value consistency over the high ceiling.
Something I also want to point out.
You can keep a hand that is 6 lands and 1 Thera Ascendant, and you still have a reasonable chance of winning that game.
Something that's also worth considering in Commander specifically, you see a lot, the 2 life gain effects you see are whenever you gain life, or if you gained 3 or more is another big one. I know that the Sam and Frodo precon, one of the best from the Lord of the Rings whole set, cares a lot about that 3 or more, and a lot of other cards apply to that. Soul Warden and Essence, or actually it's Essence Warden because it's green, is in that deck, and it works very well. Thera Ascendant guaranteeing you an instance of life gain, but also the 3 or more, I think makes it a little more versatile across. Whereas with Soul Warden and Essence Warden, you have to have 3 creatures entering in 1 turn cycle for an effect like that to be going off. So I think I'm on Thera Ascendant, but it's a lot closer than some of these other ones have been.
Yeah. All right. Official votes.
Thera Ascendant.
Thera Ascendant.
Thera Ascendant.
Well, good thing my vote doesn't matter. Furious Ascendant takes it. I'm going to still think about that. I would say I'm very 50-50, but the majority has ruled that Sarah Ascendant wins the round.
It's definitely tough, but just the raw consistency, I think, of Sarah Ascendant is undeniable.
The fact that there's an argument to be made does talk very highly in favor of the Wardens. It should be pretty hard to beat that card.
Yeah.
Agreed.
The second half of the quarter semifinals. What was that? Quarterfinals. We have Delighted Halfling. The 1 mana, 1/2, make a generic or make 1 mana of any color to have a legendary spell not be able to be countered. Or Carrion Feeder / Viscera Seer. Both 1-drop black creatures that are free sack outlets. Viscera Seer lets you scry 1. Carrion Feeder lets you put +1/+1 counters, and it can't block. All right. Who wants to start this one off?
I'll start with this by asking a question. In Commander, are you going to see people playing more decks that like to sacrifice things, like to fill their graveyard, or are you going to see more decks that are green? These sack outlets have a little bit of a deck building restriction. It's not much. Sacrificing creatures and filling your graveyard is very broad, but it's still something. Play green and having a legendary creature. Oh wait, it's in the command zone. It has 0 opportunity cost.
Yeah.
Well, it's been more to say. You got it.
Yeah, he got it. Delighted Halfling.
The joke was too funny. Delighted Halfling wins.
All right. I'm gonna plead my case for Carrion Feeder Viscera Seer. And you guys are gonna listen because I'm the host and you have to.
And mute.
No, so I'm gonna say it. I actually think the free sack outlets win this round. Delighted Halfling, so nuts. No one's arguing that any card that has made it to this stage is nuts. The game ends when a free sack outlet hits the board. Some of the time, not all the time, but there are so many combos. And Hannah, I see this in what's that treasure deck that you have?
Mahadi Emporium.
Mahadi.
It's
Mahadi. I see it in Marchesa. I see it in so many decks that when they get the free sack outlet to the board, they win the game. And I think if we're playing at what is the best card, I think obviously Delighted Halfling is a much more generically good card. It goes Evan said it. It goes into every green deck. But if we're going, I think the ceiling of the free sack outlets is too high not to at least warrant a conversation of which is better.
Can I ask a follow-up question to that?
Yeah.
So, what did we see about these extremely high ceilings when it comes to the Essence Warden and go watch the first episode, Spore Frog, and Ocelot Pride? All of these cards have game-winning ceilings, and all of these cards have been voted out of the bracket.
I'd also like to note that Ocelot Pride, Spore Frog, and the Warden's effect especially are the best of their individual types. Viscera Seer and Carrion Feeder are not the best out outlets, they're just the cheapest ones. If you are at the point of the game where you're going to win by playing a sack outlet, then you're going to have the 3 mana to play Phyrexian Altar or Warren Soul Trader. Because they happen to be the cheapest, you can play them early, which makes them extremely powerful. But if we're talking about sack outlets as win conditions, then these are not the best of their type.
And I'm going to go one further point here, Mason. Specifically in Mahadi, at least I see this. I don't know if this is the case with every sack deck in existence. Viscera Seer and Carrion Feeder are both part of the combo. They aren't the combo. I cannot win with just a Viscera Seer and my commander on the board, but I can if I also have a ping effect or a pitiless plunder, and I'm making tokens that also go along with the plan. With Delighted Halfling, I think the consistency of getting my commander every time and it can't be touched as it's being cast is kind of unstoppable at points. Like, if I could run that in the same commander deck I'm talking about and guarantee Mahadi makes it to the field, absolutely, that sounds incredible. But Viscera Seer and Carrion Feeder don't win by themselves. Delighted Halfling does, because it's a guarantee of what you've built your deck around, presumably, getting and staying on the field. So I would say it's not as close, but I do want to hear you out still.
Yeah. So responding to what Evan said, I just don't. Okay, so I'm not dismissing it, but I just don't think Ocelot Pride is in that same game-winning state. But definitely, I see what you said about Spore Frog. I think Spore Frog decks are built just if you're running Spore Frog and you want to take advantage of that infinite Spore Frog loop, then that's what your deck is aiming to do to win the game. But I just think there are so many more decks. Like if you're doing Spore Frog, you're doing a Spore Frog thing. Like that's one of your main goals. But I know I'm fighting an uphill battle here, and I know the round is over because you guys voted Delighting Halfling. So I'm gonna go ahead and award it the win. I might be honest. I think I was seeing a line for the free sack outlets to be the best one drop. I think that's who I had at the top of my list. Last round of the quarterfinals, we have Ragavan, Nimble Pilferer. A lot of text. 1 mana red, 2/1. When it does damage to a player, make a treasure, play the top card of their library. Versus card most people are here to see, Esper Sentinel. Wherever it's like launch a spell, pay X for X's cost. If they don't, draw a card. Who wants to start it?
Yeah, okay. I'm racking my brain to argue for the monkey. The monkey is a monkey, and that is really cool. And he can provide real ramp in red decks. He can provide real card draw in red decks. He can be the monkey. I'm going to talk about Esper Sentinel now. 1 mana for a Heuristic Study effect in Commander is ridiculous. 1 mana for an artifact also matters a lot. The fact that it scales with its power, it doesn't need to do that. I have an equipment deck. I put a Colossus Hammer on that thing once. That was 9/9. I drew so many cards. In Commander, things that let you profit off of what your opponents are doing are so key because you have 3 opponents. If somebody doesn't play around it, there's 2 other people who will. If somebody doesn't feed you the card, there's 2 other people who might. When you are factoring your opponent's actions into the equation and you have 3 opponents, the math increases drastically. Esper Sentinel's already a good card in 60-card formats. It sees a big chunk of play. In Commander, it is elevated to the max, and it is a real argument for just the best white card in the format. Drawing cards wins games. Ragavan might draw you some cards of your opponents that you have to play then. If Ragavan actually just taps to do that, it would probably be a little bit more in the conversation. Ragavan needing to connect is a downside. It is not always guaranteed. It is likely with 3 opponents that you'll get in with them. It is not guaranteed. I suppose it is also technically not guaranteed that Esper Sentinel will draw you cards, but it is a lot easier to just rely on your opponent's casting non-creature spells, which is what you need to do to win, than to have an open board. It is... you need to rack your brain to argue against Esper Sentinel, which is enough of a reason that it wins this round.
I will take a shot at arguing at Esper Sentinel's weaknesses, and I put an emphasis on a shot. Ragavan, at the absolute best, reads 1 mana, draw a card, make a treasure every turn cycle. And that card you're going to draw is the best card in your opponent's library. And they also don't have any blockers. That's a lot that has to go right for Ragavan to be at its best. At Esper Sentinel's worst, it is a 1 mana Thalia, Guardian of Thraben. When was the last time you saw Thalia, Guardian of Thraben in the one of Commander?
Specifically because we have a MyRail player in our play group, we see it pretty frequently, and I hate it.
Whenever I go to my LGS, in dedicated human white decks, I have not seen Thalia ever. Esper Sentinel's floor is Thalia, which is already an insane 2 mana card. Oh wait, Esper Sentinel is 1 mana. Esper Sentinel's ceiling is a Colossus Hammer, drawing you a card every turn.
See, one of the things that makes Esper Sentinel the strongest is that if your opponents want to kill it, they almost have to feed you a card. Like, if you play it on turn 1 and your opponent tries to source the Plowshares it, hope you have an extra mana around. And if you did, you just wasted your entire turn 2 killing my 1-drop. But there is one card on this list that doesn't struggle with that problem at all. There is one creature that we talked about that can kill Esper Sentinel without feeding them even slightly. It starts with I and rhymes with Chungus.
All right. I'm going to go ahead, award Esper Sentinel the win. And with that, we are moving on to the semi-finals. Now, we are down to the final 4 drops in Commander. That is Birds of Paradise, Sarah's Ascendant, Delighted Halfling, and Esper Sentinel. Before we move on to the finals, we are going to have a third place game to determine who's third and fourth. But let's go ahead and get started. Birds of Paradise or Sarah's Ascendant? I'm going to take the first shot. I'm going to deliberately say it's Sarah's Ascendant. I think Sarah's Ascendant is a absolutely nuts card. I know it's not as generically good as Birds of Paradise, but some might even say it is. If you want to play it in a white deck, it's going to be gaining you 6 life every turn. It's a nuts blocker. It flies for God knows why. I'm going to have to say Sarah's Ascendant.
This is a hard one.
Something worth considering in these final 4 is that, like, I guess it's not really comparable because it's birds against Sarah Ascendant, but, like, Delighted Halfling versus birds, I feel like is more obvious than this one because they're almost so uncomparable as 1-drops that it makes it really challenging. Like, looking at these and going, okay, one provides mana, one is just extreme aggression and life gain is kind of really difficult.
Wow. So, what exactly in a game of Commander does one card mean? One card out of your hand needs to somehow develop your board state in a direction that is going to win you the game. So, is it more valuable for that one card to represent potentially a bigger card next turn? Or is it more value for that one card to represent the best thing that you could be doing now? The dorks give you another mana for your next turn, which is humongous. It is very important. But what is that one mana going to provide that is more valuable than a 6/5? What if it's around for 2 turns? So now it's provided you with 2 mana for your 1 mana investment. That's great. You're moving in a good direction. Is that providing more than the 12 life that Sarah Ascendant has gave you at this point? At what point during the game does that 1 mana become more valuable than the amount of swing Sarah Ascendant is giving you? My answer to that question is if you are trying to combo. If you have in your hand or in your deck an exact line that will win you the game regardless of life totals, then that extra mana is quintessential. Those combo decks are looking to get that amount of mana as fast as they possibly can so that they can make their combo work regardless of what the life totals at the table are at. And in those decks, the answer is always Birds of Paradise because that 1 mana is worth more than a card. But if you're not trying to combo, and if what you're doing is attempting to reduce everybody else's life to 0 while keeping yours above, then Sarah Ascendant is the most 1 mana and a card can possibly buy you. So in the short answer to that is, in any sort of meta that is not relying around combat, Birds of Paradise is better. And in a meta in which life totals and combat are your key, Sarah Ascendant's better. It is going to be about your play group. As somebody who enjoys playing in 2 and 3 pods that are not looking to end the game with Kiki Jiki on turn 3, and that are looking to make the games long and fight, I have lost to Sarah Ascendant a lot more than I have lost to being outramped. In a vacuum, at the highest level of play, Birds of Paradise and the Mana Dorks are more important. But this is Commander. And in Commander, Sarah Ascendant's a better card.
So when it comes to beating down and reducing life totals to Sarah Ascendant, you have 3 opponents. So let's divide Sarah Ascendant's power by 3. Sarah Ascendant now has 2 power. Is a 1-mana 2 power creature that great? I understand there's more, but this is the path I'm going to take.
What are you talking about?
It is.
In Commander, there's 3 opponents, so you have 3 times as much life that you have to deal, which means Sarah Ascendant has 1/3 the power. So that's just something worth bringing up, that yes, this is a 6/6 for 1, but also, what if you're the only player who's trying to reduce life totals? Now you are the one in charge doing all of that.
Yeah, but you'd have to put every creature through that divided by 3, leaving if you are dividing it by 3, then you're going to be left with, a 2 power lifelink is going to be really powerful compared to the 0.3, 0.6s that are going to be in that same, like all the other cards that we've discussed would be 0.3s and 0.6s. This is probably the hardest one, in my opinion, that we've had to decide.
We're ready?
All right, Ed, what you got?
I'm going for the Birds of Paradise and Mana Dorks.
Hannah?
Wow. Sarah Ascendant.
All right, March.
In Commander.
Yep, only Commander.
Sarah Ascendant.
And then I'm also going to have to say Sarah's Ascendant. I could also say Birds.
There's not a wrong answer. 51-49 split. It's hard.
Totally right, and I believe you. Like, that's like...
You win any game of Commander by having the most mana and the most cards. I think that is just a defining fact of the Commander format, is cards and mana are the 2 most important things. You're scoring life totals on.
Until you get past bracket 4, though, it's damage that's winning the game. Like, cards and mana are what are getting you there, but it's damage. People are ramping so they can play their payoffs. Sarah Ascendant is the payoff, and it requires no ramp. You don't need to ramp into it. There's no setup. You can just do it immediately.
You're gonna ban Sarah Ascendant in a play group and in Commander over a Dork every time. Dorks are never too powerful. Sarah Ascendant is.
This is the best 1-drop creatures in Commander. This is not the most
At
powerful.
the moment, I'm going to have to say Birds of Paradise, so we're going to have to keep talking until we figure it out.
All right, let's have
Bracket is the best 1-drop creatures, not the most powerful. The best implies that it's good everywhere.
That's true. They're ubiquity roughly the same, though.
Removal is also something to consider because there's a lot of in Commander, lots of different kinds. No one's gonna spot remove a Bird's Paradise. They're gonna spot remove a Sarah Ascendant.
There's going to always be more mana dorks than there are going to be Sarah Ascendants, but like, there are going to be more forests than there are scrubland. Does that mean forest is a better card?
Exactly.
I think just what Sarah Ascendant does is very narrow. We kind of talked about this with the free sack outlets. It does one thing very, very, very well. Mana dorks do everything. Everything in Magic costs mana. So with mana, I can do anything I want.
But until you get to that CDH level where you're going to win with combos, what that mana is doing is putting up damage. What you're doing with that mana is playing your cards that are putting up the damage to win.
My Words of Paradise can tap for a white mana, which can be either used to cast a Swords to Plowshares or a Sarah Ascendant.
No, the sword is going to help you, is going to keep you alive. But in the ultimate goal of winning the game by putting up as much damage as you can to put your opponents down, there is no better card than Sarah Ascendant.
When you're ramping, you get benefited for delaying the game and making it go longer. Staying alive.
Would be benefited from would you delay the game?
It's been wary. I'm very 50-50 on this. But we had Marpy Anna voting for Sarah, Evan voting for Birds. I am 50-50, so that's a 2.5 and a 1.5. I think this is the closest one we've had. We've definitely talked about this one the longest.
Is Evan frozen for anybody else?
Yeah, he is.
Oh.
Evan, you defend yourself.
Well, I guess Evan gave up, so Terratin wins.
So Saracen wins. This is while we're waiting for Evan to come back, everyone watching at home, this is a good time to mention, if you disagree with us, you should tell us why in the comments, but in a very nice and respectful way.
Yep. And if you want to join the Discord, we have a Discord where we yell at each other in some nice manners. Okay, so I think the final winner, at least for now, maybe we'll change it in whenever we do this kind of thing again. We are going to move Sarah Ascendant to the final.
I don't know if I feel good about that.
Yeah, I don't feel good about it either. That'll put Birds of Paradise in our third place game. Okay, so Delighted Halfling, a green 1/2, tap to add a generic or tap to add a mana that cannot be countered when you use it to cast a spell. Versus the one, the only, Esper Sentinel. 1 white, you know what it does. I said it earlier in the episode. Should draw a lot of cards off your Esper Sentinel. What do you guys think? Is this as open and shut as I think it is? I'm kind of already dressed as Esper Sentinel. I didn't even need to do it.
You guys remember the last debate we had just like a minute ago where I asked, what exactly does one card buy you?
More cards.
When the answer to that becomes a lot more cards, the debate becomes a little bit less difficult. The value of one card in Commander is a lot. A single card can make or break a game in so many ways, whether that's protecting yourself or putting up damage or moving yourself forward. One card can change everything. When that one card is getting you more and more and more one cards throughout the entire game for so little investment, you're going to be okay with it. The big issue with a lot of card draw in Commander, or in Magic in general, is that playing it leaves you vulnerable. When you pay 3 mana for Rhystic Study, that is 3 mana that was not spent developing your board in any way. You now have no blockers. You now have no mana left. You are all done for the turn. You still feel pretty good because you played a Rhystic Study, but there was an opportunity cost. When you play Esper Sentinel, you have spent 1 mana for a creature, which is developing your board, which can attack and block like any other creature can, and which draws you so many cards. There is so little cost to this card, and it does so very, very, very much. Delighted Halfling is extremely powerful. It is good. It is very, very good. But at the end of the day, there's only so much that one card can do to compete with the value of so many more cards. Esper Sentinel wins.
I think that was really well put, and I'm going to have to agree in turn. Esper Sentinel is a menace. It is a card that shifts the entire game the second it hits the board. Playing it turn 1 is great. Playing it turn 10 is great. It's Esper Sentinel. What more can you really say?
I like to look at this from the approach of how much mana versus mana denial are you getting? Every turn cycle, Delighted Halfling is giving you 1 mana. Every turn cycle, let's say each opponent only casts 1 non-creature a turn cycle. That's 3 mana that you're denying your opponents.
That's a really good way of putting it.
So even in the terms of essentially ramping and using your mana efficiently, Esper Sentinel still does that better than Delighted Halfling.
It's just crazy.
All right. It was a short one, but I feel like that's because we already talked about birds, and birds is pretty similar to Delighted Halfling. I took their case. So are we all good casting our vote for Esper Sentinel?
Yeah, percent.
All right. We're going to go ahead. Let Esper Sentinel move on to the finals. And before we get to the end, before we get to the finals, I just want to let everyone know who's watching. I hope you had a good time watching this video. This is my first time putting together something like this, and putting together Tapped Out MTG is a dream of mine, and I'm actually just starting to take steps to actualizing it. So if you want to support the channel, please consider subscribing, liking, commenting, letting the algorithm know that I exist. I'd really appreciate it. We also have a Discord where you can apply to be a member of the podcast. When we come out with our Magic the Gathering game shows, if you want to be a contestant on those, I have a lot of really great ideas for those. Maybe even some prizes for the winners. But this is really something that I have a large passion for, and I appreciate anyone who's actually made it to this point in the video. But that being said, let's move on to the third place game, which is between Birds of Paradise and Delighted Halfling. When I put this list together, I was wondering if these cards were ever going to meet in the tournament. And here they are in the third place game. Who is better, Birds of Paradise or Delighted Halfling?
The reason that Birds in this scenario is becoming the face of the dorks section is because it's pretty hard to argue that it's not the best dork that doesn't have notable upside other than that. Delighted Halfling and Deathrite Shaman are being talked about in their own vein because they have a lot more going on. There's a big category of dorks here that Birds of Paradise hones because it is the best at what it does. Is it better than Delighted Halfling? These two are the best to compare. These two can go in any deck. They both have that of any color clause on it, and they both provide an insane amount of advantage. Birds of Paradise gives you perfect fixing on turn 1 on a flying body, which is really notable, while Halfling gives you perfect legend fixing, gives you uncounterability, and gives you a 1/2 body, which survives a lot more than most other mana dorks do. You are not going to have a fun time bow mastering down a Delighted Halfling. This is an extremely hard question for a very different reason that Thera Ascendant versus Birds are. Birds of Paradise and Delighted Halfling are extremely comparable. How much more valuable is that perfect fixing for everything over that uncounterability?
I'd really say it depends on what your play group looks like. And I think that's at least my opinion that what this boils down to is what your play group looks like. If you're playing against a bunch of sweaty blue counterspell players, you're obviously going to value that uncounterability for the Delighted Halfling a lot more. But I would have to say generically, if we're looking at the best in all situations, because there are going to be situations where there's not blue at the table, and then Delighted Halfling is just not as good as Birds of Paradise. So I would have to cast my vote for Birds of Paradise.
I'd also like to factor in how important your commander is specifically to your deck. Not all commanders are built equal, and some decks need their commander to resolve to win the game. In those specifically, Atali. Like, I'm thinking Atali specifically is the first one that comes to mind. I'm thinking Chulane's another. There are a lot of commanders. Dragon. That one can win without it.
Eat Dragon. Use the evens.
There are a lot of decks with green in their identity that must have their commander on the board to win. And Delighted Halfling's existence means that you are nigh guaranteed to have your commander for at least a turn, which is, in most cases, for the decks that need it, enough. That being said, generically is a good term. Birds of Paradise will put in the same amount of value, which is a lot, in every single deck. Delighted Halfling has a higher ceiling, but a much lower floor. A colorless dork does hinder your mana base inherently. My vote is going to go to Birds of Paradise by the narrowest of margins.
You know a weird thing that I think pushes me also over the edge to Birds? It's a 0/2 flyer, correct?
Yeah, I was wondering if we were going to bring that up. It's a flyer.
It's a 0/2. It's a 0/1.
0/1 flyer, yeah. I was going to say 1/2 is the halfling, which is another thing to consider. Genuinely, though, like, I've had some games where it's like, if I can't put up, like, a chump flyer to block someone's, like, big dragon or demon or this win con they've put their whole deck into, I'm like, I'm going to die. And I think the fact that he can block in the air is pretty significant in a format where some of the best win cons and creatures are big flyers. And also, I agree with everything else everyone else said. So, I mean, I'm going to go with Birds, not just because of that, but if nothing else, I wanted to mention it because it is something to consider at the end of the day.
Evan, anything to add?
I think I've already shown that I like Birds of Paradise. For me, something that we've talked about the fixing part of Birds, but I want to reiterate, Birds of Paradise turns your one forest that you played on turn 1 into a command tower, which not every deck builder can afford to be playing fetches, duels, and triomes. Being able to be perfectly fixed off a basic forest, I think, is extremely significant at these lower power games. And even at higher power, CDH decks are full of color pips. They need to be able to find white for their silence and blue for their Into the Floodmaw. Being able to be perfectly fixed off of just one forest is huge.
Another thing too, accessibility. Halfling is not exactly cheap now. I know for a while it was running really high. How much is it now? Like what, 10, 15 still probably?
Probably around that.
Birds of Paradise is everywhere. It is not hard to find. Yeah, $14. Like if you're just starting out, it's not easy to spend that much on one card. It's hard to justify it. Birds of Paradise is much easier. It's in free cons, you know? Like it's
Yeah, I know we haven't factored price really into any of these cards.
I think it's a good deciding factor. It's going to be the first thing you think about.
When you get down to like these really narrow margins,
Like this one.
yeah, like this one in particular, I guess you do need to go into that a little bit. So we are going to go ahead, unless there's any last minute objections, we're going to award Birds of Paradise the bronze in the 1-drop in Commander.
Commander,
John,
just a record show, just to define dorks. Llanowar Elves, Finthorn Elves, Elvish Mystic, all the 1-mana ones that tap for green, they're here too. Avacyn's Pilgrim, Elves of Deep Shadow, they tap for white and black respectively, they're here too. Arbor Elf, the one that can untap a forest, has more upside. You can enchant that forest to make more mana. That's here too. It is, if we wanted to put every single dork individually, they would have taken up about half the list. And we ultimately decided that Birds of Paradise is the best to represent dorks as a category. If you disagree, if you want to tell me that Arbor Elf is actually the greatest card Magic ever printed, go to the Discord, go to the comments.
thank you for the plug. All right, now the moment you've all been waiting for. It's been about 2 hours. Who is the best 1-drop in Commander? We have Sarah Ascendant, a 1-mana 6/6 flyer lifelink, versus Esper Sentinel, the 1-mana Rhystic Study. Both of these cards, as we've been talking about for the past 2 hours, are absolutely ludicrous in Commander. But who's better? Also, one last thing. This just proves how crazy White's 1-drops are. That
I was just going to say that.
me 2 white 1-drops in these times.
White has really become important and crazy in Commander. It would have been green for the longest time. The fact that these top 2 are not green creatures, both of them, is crazy to me.
Right.
Just like third and fourth notes, not that bad.
Who wants to start the final conversation of the podcast?
I want to go for this.
All right, Mark starts.
So, I want to return to the same discussion that I've been going for these last couple. The value of one card. How much can one card put you ahead towards winning the game? Spending 1 mana to get a Thera Ascendant is probably the single best rate for one individual card that any card in Commander can give you. Spending 1 mana on a 6/6 with flying and lifelink is, in the vacuumicia vacuums, the absolute best use of one card and 1 mana you can possibly have. But Esper Sentinel is not the value of one card, is it? Esper Sentinel is the value of however many cards it's going to draw you in a given game. If Esper Sentinel only drew you 1 card, first of all, that would already be an extremely good card. A 1 mana 1/1 that drew you a card on entry would be great. It wouldn't be as good as Thera Ascendant if it only drew you 2 cards. Now, maybe it's getting even better. Maybe now your 1 mana 2 cards is better. What if it draws you 3 cards? Now it's undeniably better. Now it's Ancestral Refall. That card's very good. Esper Sentinel can accomplish the scenario I just laid out by the end of the table's turn 1. At the highest level of play in this game, most players are going to have a turn 1. And most of those turn 1s are going to trigger Esper Sentinel. And most of those triggers are going to draw you a card. And if it's still alive, it can draw you many, many more. The value of 1 card and 1 mana is most clearly emphasized by the 2 cards that we have here. Is the value of 1 mana and 1 card on a 6/6 lifelinker greater than the value of the potential that Esper Sentinel has? It has a lower floor. It could get gut-shotted immediately. That would be bad. In which case, Serra Ascendant's better. But Esper Sentinel, unlike some of the other cards that we've discussed in this list, doesn't have a ceiling. It does not stop its benefit at any point. Serra Ascendant's ceiling is what you see is what you get. Esper Sentinel is not. Now, look at the list that we have here. There is only 1 other card on this entire list that has the text, draw a card on it. And that is why Insidious Fungus is the best 1-drop in Commander, baby. End the podcast. We got him. Like and subscribe.
Tell me a system about cards.
Tell me about switch plus cards. Yep.
Tamia draws more cards than Insidious Fungus.
Actually, Insidious Fungus, worst card on the list.
Even if you want to extend the definition, Ragavan probably draws cards.
I've been owned. I vote for Esper Sentinel. Make somebody else talk.
All right, Hannah.
So, now that I'm aware that Serra Ascendant cares about 30 or more, and I've learned how a cardboard works, go me, this is not as easy as I thought it was going to be. Marco said it the most eloquently. I'll give him that. But I think the only other thing to talk about here is the fact that Esper Sentinel wasn't... Obviously, Serra Ascendant was not designed for Commander. It was not a set that was designated for Commander. And on top of that, it cares about a factor that is like you start with 10 more than it should care about in Commander. We are aware of this. Esper Sentinel was a Modern Horizons 2 card, which is something I'd also like to consider. I'm sure people at Wizards of the Coast thought about how this card would get played in Commander, and they were fine with it. But the fact that this card is intended to come from a set where you're playing against one other person in the Modern format, and it's already as good as it is there, puts it into the lead for me. If I were to play an Esper Sentinel on turn 1 against an opponent while playing Modern, back when this card came out, I would most likely win that game. It is really, really hard to beat a turn 1 Esper Sentinel. And then you factor in the fact that there are 2 other people who are also going to be giving me value off that. I think it wins. Esper Sentinel, the only actual downside I can think of is that it does die to most artifact removal. Not Haywire Might, but almost every piece of artifact removal you'd be pointing at Soul Rings and Radiant Lotuses. It's better to be targeted at Esper Sentinel. Like you can't beat value like that. But like it doesn't matter because it's Esper Sentinel. By the time someone's able to fully draw and target that, you've drawn at the minimum 1 card off it, which is already fine if it was a 1/1 that entered and drew 1 card. If your opponent had a 1-drop artifact piece and it went to their turn, by casting it, you would draw a card because they could not pay the 1 most likely. Esper Sentinel is the best 1-drop in Commander, in my opinion.
All right. That's 2 votes for Esper Sentinel. Evan, are you taking it home? Are you claiming on the podcast? Or are you giving Serra Ascendant a fighting chance?
What I want to look at here is how much life is 1 card worth. We look at cards like Night's Whispers. 2 cards, 2 life. That's 1 life a card. The insanely powerful Necropotence. 1 life, 1 card. That's generally the rate that you're getting cards is 1 life to 1 card. Here, we kind of have this toss-up, is how many cards is worth getting hit by a Serra Ascendant? Is 1 card equal 6 life? Is 1 card equal 12 life? I jokingly say sometimes that I would pay 39 life to draw 1 card. And while that's extreme, I think if we had a card that was 5 Phyrexian pips that read draw card, people would play it. 10 life to draw 1 card.
Help my Rexia, baby.
Sarah Ascendant swings for a life total of 12. 6 to you, 6 to them. Would you pay 12 life for just 1 card? I think a lot of Commander players would. And that's just 1 player. Would you pay 12 life for 2 cards? How about 3 cards? And you keep just getting that ratio smaller and smaller until eventually you get to 1 life, 1 card, which is not unreasonable for Esper Sentinel. I'm going to Esper Sentinel with this one.
And I don't really think I can add anything that hasn't already been said, but I would have to agree. Esper Sentinel is the best 1-drop in Commander. Sarah's Ascended made an insane run, not undeserved, but it has to be Esper Sentinel. One of the strongest ability you can have is card draw. That's what we see through the Game Changers list, through Rhystic Study, all of the best cards in Commander, Rhystic Study, Mystic Remora, Esper Sentinel, they all deal with card. The One Ring, it's card draw. It's getting more cards than your opponents, using those cards to increase the odd that you find your combo pieces, you get your ramp in order to get into your bigger things. It's card draw. Across every card game that I've ever played at a professional level, which is most of them, card draw is the most universally strongest thing you can have in a game. The more cards you have, the better chances you have of beating your opponents. And in Magic Commander, getting down a card that will statistically draw you 3 cards a turn. Call it 2 cards a turn. Say 2 or 1 cards per turn at the worst. It is still providing unmatched value for you to win your game. And that's why Esper Sentinel has to be the best 1-drop in Commander.
Do you guys think this video is going to single-handedly raise the price of it again?
Probably not, because nobody knows I exist.
100%. Esper Sentinel can be a $50 card.
It's going to... $1 billion.
Youngest Commander staple. $1 billion, baby. I already bought out the market.
But guys, thank you so much for watching. I didn't even intend for this to be a 2-episode podcast. But we just really got into the details of the cards.
We're all yappers, baby.
Guys,
Especially Evan.
thank you so much for watching. Guests, do you have anything you want to add before we end the episode?
You know Evan does.
I just think y'all are underrating Birds of Paradise, but all in all, Esper Sentinel takes it home.
We got third.
Deserves second, but they said
Really good.
thank you much for having us here. This was a blast.
Fun to go, big.
I want to see Carrion Feeder in third. That's actually where I put it for second.
You're not putting Carrier of a bird.
I would.
You know what? On my original list, I just kind of forgot that I put Soul Ward and Essence Ward in second. Like, I just kept moving stuff and it just ended up there. And I was like, yeah, this is good. And I sent it into you, Mason. And I was like, maybe not. It was good. It wasn't that good.
I wonder what my list would have looked like if I'd remembered Tomio existed.
Number 1, Tomio, baby. Turn 1, Planeswalker.
We can all talk about that later. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for tuning in to the first and second episodes of the Tapped Out MTG podcast. If you would like to be featured on an episode of either the Commander gameplay, Tapped Out MTG podcast, Tapped Out game shows, please go join the Discord. You can find more information about all of that there. But I think that's going to do it for this first episode. Thank you guys so much for joining me, Mark, Hannah, Evan. It has been a blast. So long as you guys didn't hate it, I'm sure we'll see you on another episode.
Oh, we'll be back.
But
Yeah.
Subscribe. We have a lot to say. We want to say it to you.
you don't mean little to me. We are trying to get to that 1,000 subscriber mark where we can start monetizing the videos, and I can actually start trying to make this my full-time job. So, thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.
Bye.
See you again.
Bye.